everyone. Good evening and welcome to season 4 of Inside the Rookery, episode 13. We're delighted today to be welcoming Kieron Gillen to the stream. Kieron is a comics writer, a recovering critic, a games designer, and co-founder of Rock, Paper, Shotgun. I'm also joined by Andy Law and James Wallace, who no doubt will also jump in and answer some questions and ask their own of Kieron. As always, we've got loads of pre-submitted questions, but please jump in the comments and the chat to submit any more, and I'll bring them up on screen, as I always do. Kieron, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I've just been distracted by your amazing cat earphones, that's all I want to talk about now. It's like, this is fantastic.
We can talk about that. I noticed that you didn't have a little tagline like the rest of us, and then you did. So, like, you literally wrote something for us, like, in the moment. It was like actually watching an author at work.
I will be invoicing later.
Yeah, of course.
£70,000 per word.
Yes. It's like I use StreamYard quite a bit, and I never run it with this bottom stuff on. And I'm like, why
it's a new feature that we got very excited about 2 weeks ago, and we're like, oh, we can add things.
Yeah, I say like because basically, obviously, you normally got your character name. I when I'm running games here, character name, player name. And that's like, it's too long to fit on the screen otherwise. So this is actually solving a problem solely for my life. So I could not be more excited to be here.
So I'm glad to have helped.
Yes.
Cat headphones and new StreamYard features. Excellent.
Life is good. It really is.
Secondhand Samurai is already coming in the chat and yelling, "Die is for once okay. Love Die RPG."
Also, joking aside, like when I was selling the comic diary, which is one of the things I've written, you have to be so careful with like subject lines and emails. It's like regarding the comic book series Die. That's the subject line. You can't just write Die at any point because it gets messy. And you'd like, especially mailing retailers. You know what I mean? Like, don't do that.
Die.
Yes, die soon.
Yeah,
I can imagine that would go badly, or could go badly. But yeah, for people who don't know your stuff, Kieron, give us the 30-second or the 1 minute or the talk for as long as you want.
Pitch.
The pitch.
Sorry, the really short version is it's a word to sale. But the less short version is I kind of I became a games critic back in the 90s. Like I paid my way for university writing about video games which seems impossible. But that it's easy when you remember they haven't actually increased word rates in any period since. So that's a lot of money for it, like a late teenager, circa 95. I got into comics circa 2000. I was not really a comic person growing up. Like that's not quite true. You may want to ask about that later. And I got properly into comics like in 20s, and when I was 25. Completely fell in love with it and got very much into fanzines and that kind of scene. And since then, I basically found my way, dig a comic image called Phonogram, which was like a black and white indie comic about pop music and magic, which somehow got quite good reviews. And that basically led me to various people offering me work. And I found myself at Marvel and then eventually doing stuff that sells. And I've somehow like leveraged. Oh no! And at the same time I was doing that, I was also co-founded a website called Rock, Paper, Shotgun, which is a PC games website, which still exists now. So yeah. I worked for PC Gamer back then. This is the non-linear version. Basically, I've done the easiest versions. I'm not allowed to talk to various of my wife's friends' children in this way because they're not really meant to know this is a career option. You know, if I said, I wrote about video games until I got bored and then I decided to write comics instead. That's not really the kind of career path they're trying to indoctrinate children into. So yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah, I have the same thing. I offer to go into my kid's school and say, hey, you could create board games for a living. And they go, no, we'd rather not. Nice careers in the law or making money in the city. That's more the kind of thing we're after.
That's the difference between the Scottish and the English education system right there, because the Scottish education system, they're constantly desperate. They're like, parents come, you make games, you come in and you do what? You paint windows, you come in too. Like they just want everyone to come in and talk about their jobs to the kids, because in all seriousness, right, the standard, what had been for many years, like go to uni, study law, medicine, architecture, or whatever, that aspirational professional career is not for everyone. And I think it's great that we've had so many people on the show who can talk about their careers, and they've come into the gaming industry in one way or another in totally different ways. There's no two stories that are alike, and that's amazing.
It's
Anytime I talk to children, like not children, that implies I follow them around in the street shouting. Like a few times I've been in schools, that the thing I've always been trying to do is actually, because most people in the class it won't matter to, but there might be someone in the class who realised, oh, it's permission. Because I was like, I was writing for Amiga Power, which was the place I first wrote, before I realised it was a career option for me. So I was earning money as a games journalist before I realised that I was allowed to think of myself as that kind of person. I was reading about England's Dreaming by John Savage, which is an amazing history of punk rock. There's a bit where John Savage describes being like working in his job in the toilets at lunch hour, photocopying a zine and or taking the photocopied stuff and assembling it to let the A bombs in my head out, to quote, I think that was the line. And that moment when I read that, I was, oh right, I get it, that's me. Like, and that question of permission, especially if you're from a working class sort of background, you're not aware that this is an option. You know, the idea that, I mean, I remember actually one of the Marvel writers, so when MySpace was the thing, you remember that incredibly crass, they have their salary on it. You know, back at MySpace, you used to say how much you could earn, and I had to basically show that to my mum and dad, saying, "Look, a comic writer earns that money, which is basically more than we could ever dream of earning." As in, it's not just okay, you probably won't, but like that of it,
you could,
it's abstractly there. It's not just like beans.
Yeah, our daughter is studying games design, and she was recently doing an assignment that was like doing a mood board and character studies, and she's been literally doing them for years in her and her sister's like made up game that's like fan fiction of, I'm gonna say, what is it, Andy? The one where they're all like fighting each other and there's the girl with the earphone jacks.
That's pretty much every anime ever.
Yeah, they're all fighting each other. One of them, and then Demon Slayer is another one that they love. But like literally, she just like sailed through that assignment because she was like, I've been doing this for years anyway. So yeah, I think it's really important for kids to hear, like, you know, you can do, like, you are allowed to do that, and actually some of the stuff you do that maybe has been laughed at, like fan fiction, is actually really good practice, and that's okay.
I remember when the author Storm Constantine, she was from Stafford. And like, in fact, I only really found out like last week that she worked at the Stafford Library, which of course is where I got all my books for as a kid. So like, almost certainly I got books from her. And that kind of. But I remember when I first discovered that her as a teenager, and actually got her way through books off the shelf. They go, oh, someone from Stafford does this. You know, that sort of stuff is just so powerful. That kind of, this is a thing, as opposed to aliens. Because I think most people in a creative field, especially pre-internet, describe the moment they realize a person made this. And if a person made this, that implies I could get paid for it. I could be the person.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a person. It's a person like me made this.
Yes.
Because there is. I mean, I always put authors up on a pedestal. It's like I could never be like you. You are so, you know, you are godlike beings. You know, to be revered. Not realizing that most of them are, you know, in a bedsit, you know, hammering out as quickly as they can, being paid pennies for, you know, back then pennies, and as you say, today literally the same number of pennies per word. I literally this week had a thing. I emailed someone and said, oh, I hear you're looking for reviewers. I used to review for you. Is your rate the same? He went, yeah, our rate is the same. And now we buy all rights for that same amount of money instead of letting you have the copyright. So things have actually got worse in a number of areas for writers. But yeah, it's just, writers are just people who write. That's all it is. And that making that logical jump, or I don't think it is a logical jump. I think it's almost intuitive. There's a synapse that has to click over in your head to go, they're like me, I could do this. But yeah, it's an amazing jump. And as you say, that moment where you realize it's not just something you do, something you can actually make a living at as well.
Yeah.
And it's slightly different for artists. Andy, I remember when you were starting out, and it was, you would be sharing your stuff online and people would come to you and would be like, oh, can I just commission you privately to draw my character? And our younger daughter is like starting early, like her dad is, like, she's doing the same thing on Sky, the game she plays. So she commissions, but she charges like candles, which is the in-game currency in Sky, to like to create these little things. But I think it's very rare that you would go to someone like privately like that and be like, oh, hey, could you write me something about my character? Because we all sort of feel somehow like, no, I'll just write it myself. So I think getting into art is maybe a little bit more easy in that way.
I think it's like art. And this is the thing about when I got into comics. This is a much larger question, but like when I was in bands at university, and I realized basically there's a moment when I realized I could not trust anybody else, as in they're all complete flakes. And I mean, as in I cannot rely. I'm going to get a really crap job, and I'm going to be stuck in it if I don't find a way to cheat the system. I cannot rely on these fellow band members. I've got to become a writer, do it myself. And then I thought my entire career has been gravitated back towards collaborative mediums because I must love it some reason. With artists have an actual visible, clear talent. As in, it's much harder to know if someone's a good writer than an art. Almost anyone could look at someone and goes, I mean, we talk about subjectivity and all those things, but really, you can look at, I can't do that. That's clearly something I can't do. Whilst writing, people go, oh, it's words in order. You know, it's one of those things where like comics are quite easy to censor because you can tell instantly whether it's something the kids should be reading or not. Whilst words are a really great way to get stuff that kids shouldn't be reading. You know, not that the aim is to do that, but you know, words are just harder to interpret their quality for better or worse. And of course, that's why so many writers have this. Obviously, imposter syndrome is one thing, but the other thing is like weirdly defensive egomania. You know what I mean? As in, they've got to believe, no, I am truly a writer, and you are merely someone who puts words in order, which is nonsense, obviously.
The thing about Stafford, so I never knew Storm Constantine was from Stafford because you don't imagine someone being called Storm from Stafford. Like I genuinely thought she must be from like LA or somewhere.
Yeah, or the moon or something.
yeah, the moon, but definitely not Stafford. I used to travel to Stafford for work, and on the way to Stone, which is like England's canal town. Yeah, fun times watching my colleagues jump over that canal and try not to die on a Friday night. So Secondhand Samurai says that's another story. My first Kieron Gillen book was Phonogram from Two Fat Goblins in Stafford. Seeing Props the Pub in the DIE comic was very, very funny.
That's like, if you recognise it's Props, it dates us all. Secondhand Samurai, but like it was very important for me. Like almost all the comics I do. That's not quite. Most of the comics I write are explicitly in the real world and in real locations because it's in that kind of I want to ground it, and the part of my philosophy is. And it's kind of like I think it must be picked up from a few places. At least part of it might be Marvel Comics, as in the point of Marvel as opposed to DC is it's on Earth. Spider-Man could fly past that window. Not fly, swing. If he flew, that's a new Spider-Man. But that it's about a transformation of your environment by an act of imagination, therefore enchanting the environment. That's what I find interesting about those forms. So me choosing all the crappy places I've ever lived and drop them into comics isn't, obviously it's partially filtered autobiography, but it's also you're allowed to think about where you are in a magical way. And I was talking about parkour. I remember when parkour came out, I was immediately like, this is amazing. And the parkour is basically, to use my usual metaphor, like, the estates across France are built as prisons. That's kind of what they're for. They're the prisons for the working class. And the parkour is a reimagining it as a play park. The idea, you've created this thing to hold me, I will see it in a different way and therefore make it different. And that's what I think fantasy does. Or at least that's one of the uses of fantasy. And that's why I set prop, the idea of anyone's been to props, it is a fun nostalgic kick, but it's also, I could think about my crappy pub I went to as a teenager as a magical place. It's a crucible. I mean, like when I did Phonogram, like you've really got me in pretentious mode this evening. I'm sorry.
I'm loving it.
All good stuff.
When I started like Phonogram, it's like there was a lot of like serious young people, and we talk about permission again. Like they started thinking about it as the metaphor, the idea that they treated their relationship with music in a more serious way because I'd clearly thrown this nonsense on the page and committed to it. And I believe, and it's like I believe in pop music for better or worse.
I love that the parkour thing. We've talked about this before on the stream. The Scandinavian concept of Spiel and Leka, so play that has rules, board games and sports, and play that doesn't have rules, the free play that children do. And for most of us, the guests that we have on, like the first time we experienced role playing, it was literally in the playground, reliving Star Wars, reliving Indiana Jones, whatever it was you were reliving. And the idea that parkour is like improvisation gymnastic play is just such a beautiful idea. But I think like for a long time, a lot of us who've been in this industry have felt like we were like weird nerds and you had to kind of explain it. Like I would be like, role playing, it's like D&D, it's not like a sex thing to people at work, right? Yeah.
Or sometimes both.
But
So the power of play, like, so I go to the gym at the moment, and when I go on the rowing machine, I'm not on a rowing machine in a gym. I'm literally pretending to be my current character, like chasing cultists down the Reich in a rowing boat, right? And that's how I motivate myself at the gym, because and like I'm not just lifting weights. I'm improving her like archery draw and stuff like that. And I think the power of play and the power of gaming, especially in the British culture for a long time, very much like you're a child and then you're an adult. And then there was a weird group of us who still did.
I'm hearing nothing now. She's gone quiet.
Yeah. It's
Sorry,
the image paused and the voice carried on for a while.
My camera froze. Our Wi-Fi's been really bad this week. Right, I'm just gonna get into one of the pre-submitted questions, just following on from my chat about games. What games are you playing at the moment? Kevin asks.
So I thought who's Oh no, Kevin's asking the question. Tell you, like across the obviously I've had a kid. Not obviously, I had a kid a year ago. Therefore, my time is squeezed. So I'm not playing a huge amount. Like I've managed to get back into some sessions, which is exciting, and I've started playing a video game for the first time in like a year again. Like I've gone to Marvel Snap in the last week, like a fool.
Dangerous, you fool!
It's a really tight little design, like
it's
12
really,
cards.
really well designed. I love it.
Like honestly, no. I could feel my brain, my old games journalist brain. No, I know what to write about it, which is the thing. I ran a Trophy Gold. I actually ran a 12-part Trophy Gold campaign last like back end of last year, which worked really well. It's a beautiful system. But I've written like 2,000 words for my newsletter. If anyone, the newsletter is the best way to keep up with me. But I've got an essay I've got to polish up about it. It's just it was exactly the sort of weird OSR story game hybrid that I needed, and exactly what I needed to start GMing again. I know I'm forgetting something. There's one game I played with somebody else, but this week I was on the Gauntlet, and somebody is developing a Brindlewood Bay hack, and it's basically a Cadfael game. Cadfael, Name of the Rose. So we're all playing friars. We're all trying to solve mysteries in medieval times. I'm playing the Federico, who is the beekeeper, who's got this special ability. Basically, I get an XP for time anytime I punish somebody extrajudicially once a session. So I'm kind of the punisher. And the fact they're the beekeeper, there's an implicit sinisterness to them. I'm playing them a little bit kinder than that, but their history is very clearly very dark. And the idea, eventually, I'm going to do something with these bees. So that's what I'm playing at the moment. And there's got to be something else. I need to actually put something on the calendar. You know what I mean? I ran Hollows, like Rowan Rook Deckard's new game in beta. I ran 3 sessions of Hollows, which is basically Shadow of the Colossus, Dark Souls, D&D 4th edition, an attempt to, like, from the indie game tradition, try to do something that's actually kind of a tactical combat game, but interspersed with some like quite freeform improvisational stuff. And it's like playing with a group of story gamers, suddenly they realize, oh my god, rolling criticals is fun. So it's like it feels like forbidden fruit. It's like listening to Led Zeppelin if you're a punk. So yeah.
Don't get Andy started on Snap. I sense, Kieron, that you and Andy might be quite similar in that Andy cannot play a game. He can't just do one thing at once for a start, but he literally cannot play a game without providing me with a review of it and an ongoing commentary of review, which in a way is quite useful because then I know whether I want to play it or not, but sometimes can get quite annoying.
It's a disease, honestly. Like
it is. It's horrible.
I've must contextualize and criticize.
Yeah. Completely, 100%. And I did that with Snap for quite some time. Really cleverly designed. And tight. And
Electra murders squirrels all the time. And I'm what's that about? That's fundamentally beautiful.
I've got to. I mean, as a Marvel writer, how is it seeing characters that you've written and to whose continuity you have added significant points coming up in a game and potentially doing things that you don't? Or sorry, do you ever come up with going that's not? I'd do that differently.
No, I must admit, like I would just work for hire. Like when you're working for like characters you don't own, I think for me, there's people who I've come from a different tradition. For me, I knew the horror stories, and I know that they fucked over Kirby. They're certainly going to fuck over you. So in other words, you go into it with emotional contraceptives, is the way I describe it. I know these are not my children. I'm a nanny. You know,
Yeah.
I am explicitly brought in, and if I'm not able to have that distance, I shouldn't be doing the job. And occasionally stuff sneaks in because you're human. In the same way, you know, you get connected to the people you're looking after, but mostly, no. It's never like even when like someone takes, because like, you get quite a lot of training because you know you write the characters and someone takes over the book, and even if you're a friend, you say, no, I wouldn't have written it differently. You know, and quite often I stop reading the book after I leave the book for a while because I'm just too close to it, you know, and I'm always thinking, no, I would have done it differently. But like,
Yeah.
once you've got a bit of distance, you're fine. And especially like something like Snap, when I see characters which I kind of like defined, or even weirder, powers which actually locations which I invented, like Sinister London's in there, that's mine. You know, and that's a good one. You know, it duplicates characters. I'm like, I can use the hell out of that. And there's a couple of quotes I've seen of mine in there. Like everything is sinister is a line I used. Yeah, and obviously like all the Star Wars stuff turns up quite regularly. So I wrote in the book of Boba Fett, the character Black Chrysanthemum, the Wookiee, that was one of mine. So
Really?
them turning up. Yeah, I made that. That was in my Darth Vader run.
There you go.
And when they turned up, the entire internet's thirsting over this Wookiee I made up. It's a bit like I did not make this to be. This is not meant to be a vote. I had a friend of mine at university whose first sex dream as a teenager was over Chewbacca. So maybe on some level I was trying to, you know. Yeah, I'm not going to name that friend.
And they're here tonight.
Yes, I was about to say, like, this is going to very different places, and I think.
But yeah, in The Mandalorian, there was a lot of my social media feeds, and a lot of my friends were just like, including like, how can someone who literally has never taken their helmet off and only speaks, and you only see his art, like, how can he be so hot? Like, he's just armor and a voice. Like, I don't understand this.
All I want is armor. That's okay.
Yeah, and a voice. Yeah, let's keep your helmet on.
But on the subject of Star Wars, we mentioned Star Wars earlier on in the subject of play. How do you get a gig like that? I mean, you were in with Marvel at the time. Did you go to them and say, I've got some ideas about Darth Vader, or did they come to you and go, ever thought about Darth Vader?
That makes it sound sexual again. We're going to be... I just read like everything's sexual now. I'm sorry. This is very much a Saturday night interview. I am. So I would just come off a bit of back history. My big break at Marvel after I got in, I took over 4, as in THOR. I can't do THs from J. Michael Straczynski, who left the book very quickly, and it was, shall we say, a poison chalice because it involved me having to jump aboard the book very quickly and write a script instantly, despite the fact not knowing what he was going to hand in for his final issue. So basically, I kind of like masterminded all the possible ways he could go, and and then when the script came in, I wrote my script almost since. Luckily, he actually ended it in a really nice place. So it was actually one of my favorite routes through because I had 3 issues to finish his plots, and by the end of them, I had to get them back to where the Asgardians were in America. They were at this place called Broxton. Now, they're presently in Latveria, where Doctor Doom lives. Also, have to make sure that, because there's a big crossover coming, this is why. And also, Loki is just helped Doctor Doom dissect Asgardians, and he has to be in the good books of the Asgardians again. So I've got this 3, and I don't know where I'm starting. So I've got 3 issues. I mean, and I genuinely see there's something. I swear JMS must have been planning for something with this and not done it eventually. Like there's a bit he just drops it aside that if you remove the heart from Asgardia, it carries on beating for 3 minutes. It's like, okay, I can use that. Loki can save somebody who appears. Yeah. Anyway, after that, I meant to have 2 issues during tying into this crossover. Then someone else would take over. In actual fact, so this is going way deep in this hole. In actual fact, that run kept on being extended a couple of issues at a time due to various reasons. So it's meant to be 5 issues and ended up being 13 issues. And it extended like an issue or 2 at a time. So I'm constantly having to make stuff up or work out what the hell I'm going to do next. And it carries on selling, and it reviewed very well. In ways which is actually, you know, A, gratifying, B, surprising. So Marvel understood that I could deal with complete hell situations. So they offered me Uncanny X-Men, which I took over. Uncanny X-Men was in a weird situation where there was a major crossover happening again, in fact 2, neither of which I'd be writing, both of which are X-Men centric. It was Avengers versus X-Men. So I'd be basically dealing with another really difficult situation and dancing between raindrops. So I do that. It does very well, reviews well, people like it. So at that point, I've shown my ability to deal with nonsense and to turn up good product and not whine, I think. Like, you know, the thing about me, as long as I know what the situation is when I come in, I'm okay with it. Like, the bit that gets me to quit and almost quit instantly is like, no, don't change it on me. Because, you know, boundaries are important. So they basically, obviously, they're going to work with Lucasfilm. So, like, they've never worked with Lucasfilm before. They have no idea what it's going to be like. So I'm pretty sure they ask me, Kieron, do you want to do a Star Wars book? Because they know I can, A, I'm good, B, I sell. Like, you know, at least, you know what I mean? And C, I'm not somebody who's going to be a prima donna. You know what I mean? And same with Jason. I think Jason also, Jason Aaron was the other Star Wars writer to begin with. He's a very, very calm guy, very collected, incredible writer, you know? If they came to me, hey, we want to do 2 books, like you do Jason will be doing Star Wars, you doing another book. It could be anything you want, but like it's in this time period. We think Darth Vader might be good. And that was it. So basically they came to me as somebody who was the right skill set for the job. And I went away and thought, like, am I the right person for the job? Because it's actually in canon Darth Vader. And they just rebooted the canon. And I wrote scenes like Darth Vader realizing he had a son for the first time. You know, these are meaty scenes. These are real. And I'm like, and only one person gets to do this. Like, am I the right? And in a moment of real arrogance, I think it's not arrogant. Actually, I did sat back. I think actually no, I make sense for them because at Marvel, I mainly write villains. Like, I think my villain work is I'm interested in why people are bad. So a lot of my stuff is circling around that. I wrote Loki intense. I wrote Mr. Sinister. I wrote the X-Men all as villains. You know, that this is what interests me. So like, yeah, I guess I might be the best person for the job presently working at Marvel. And it turned out very well. And and it kind of built from there. And as Kilshandra said, like, I invented Dr. Aphra, who was a character supporting. She did very well. I wrote a book spin, and it all kind of one thing led to another until I got bored of writing Star Wars and stopped.
So Tilashandra says she does love Dr. Aphra and strikes her as an anti-Indiana Jones, like Elric is anti-Conan. Was that the intent?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, anti's the wrong, inverted, ethically inverted, because she's very Indiana Jones. She's just all her ethics have switched. Like, you know, Elric, of course, is the opposite of Conan. That Africa, because we visited Lucasfilm, because we were basically pitching what we wanted to do. So me, Jason, like the editorial team, we went around, and there was a moment when I was passing the big Indiana Jones statue, because my thinking about Star Wars is about archetypes. It's the blues. Like, for me, it's like I'm a very pretentious, wanky writer in lots of ways, but for me, a Star Wars has to feel like Star Wars. You know, the rhythm, the cadence, and that also means, like, you know, that the characters are simple characters. Like, there's a lot of depth in there, but the core idea can be summed up very simply. You know, you've got the farm boy, you got the fallen princess, you got the rogue, and all these kind of stuff. What archetypes are interesting if we point to Star Wars? And I was passing Indiana Jones and had the moment of like, Indiana Jones. You know, someone who collects artifacts. That's 100% great Star Wars character. And then if ethically inverted one, and then the line came to mind. It belongs in an armory. And I actually got that line in, which is, they don't normally allow that kind of stuff, but that was such a key statement of character. So that's where it came from. The idea, we need, you know, someone who does interesting stuff in a slightly different way. And of course, also, since I was writing Darth Vader, I was solving a different problem. The problem was, of course, how do you make a Darth Vader book? Because the problem is, like, you could do a Darth Vader book like the dull grey machinery of fascism, and that would be boring, and it wouldn't be Star Wars. I had to find a way to do epically inverted Star Wars. So basically, Vader kind of takes my Luke role, and Aphra takes the Indiana. So Aphra takes the Han Solo role, which of course is one other connection between the Indiana Jones of it. But also because Vader only works if he shuts up. You want, like, so much of my run is Vader not saying anything, and you get these kind of one-panel flashbacks of things he might be thinking, but you never know what he's going to do. It's like the Punisher. You all should be worried to be in the same room, or rather, anyone in the same panel as Vader, you should be worried for. So Aphra was my kind of, here's a likable, at least semi-likable character who can do all the exposition, because comics doesn't work, because the sort of visual storytelling you do in movies is very expensive in terms of comic pages. So like anybody, someone talking more allows me to like, Vader shut up and be cool, and Aphra could just be like, oh my god, I'm afraid I'm going to die, constantly for like 25 issues, and that's where she came from.
I'm really glad Martin brought up Andor, because I was going to, but like I do it too much. Andor really sold the dull grey machinery of fascism, though. But what I was going to say about Andor is when you were talking about Star Wars characters being simple archetypes, I immediately recognized that as the magic of what I felt Andor did really, really well. You can think of all those characters that were in that, you know, the ambassador, the senator, you know, the shop, the undercover spy, like they all have a real purity of their concept that just, I thought, made that show a work of just pure brilliance.
I'm only 4 episodes in. This is like the new parent. I am loving it. I know, I'm genuinely digging it, and like, I know it only gets better. I think mine's right. The thing is, you've got to understand what we were doing, because we are launching a new line of Star Wars books. Not like 7 in, and you can go further off to the sides. We're trying to say, we're doing Star Wars on paper. So like, we're hitting the core thing. Secondly, it doesn't, Andor isn't about the fascists. It is the core of it. It's you can always do fascism, but they're the bad guys, and you're not meant to be with them. If you were just following the guy who's very clearly Rimmer, it wouldn't be the same. He is just Rimmer from Red Dwarf, isn't he? That guy. Anyway, sorry, Rimmer in serious mode, obviously. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, yeah.
But I think.
Sorry, can I jump in for a moment here? Just talking about the Star Wars and archetypes, because this is meant to be a role-playing game thing. If anyone remember the West End Games Star Wars game by Greg Costikyan, which was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Greg Costikyan had come off the back of editing Ghostbusters, which is one of the great early freeform games. He'd done Paranoia, which turned the whole role-playing thing completely up its head. This is a guy who was not just stretching the envelope. He was tearing it up and throwing it in pieces. And he comes back and does what is essentially a character class-based game for Star Wars, because it's about the archetypes, because you want to be the Jedi or the young Jedi or the kid or the Wookiee or, the space pirate or the smuggler or whatever. And it works so well. It is one of the great, great role-playing game designs. Greg Costikyan's West End Games Star Wars. And it's the heart of what makes that entire universe work.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, agreed.
I think I was just going to jump in and say in Andor, although it does the grey machinery of fascism well, it does it well in the way that you were talking about, Kieron, the villains. So they are the villains, but actually they're just people who are doing their jobs. In some ways, they're less villainous than some of the people, who are actually terrorists. And in their minds, they're not villains, they're fighting terrorists. And I've always thought that was a really interesting dichotomy in Star Wars between one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, and one person's fascist is another person's person keeping order.
Well, after that Darth Vader, I did Aphra, then I moved on to do the main Star Wars book I took over from Jason, and like I was mainly interested. This is of course after Rogue One came out, so I was watching that and thinking, I wonder what Luke thought when he discovered all this. Then I realized, wait, I could write that. And that was basically my run. It basically starts off by going to Jeddah. And it's Luke and the core cast meeting all the surviving partisans. And that that was me really. So basically, I've seen a few people mention bits of my run when Andor have turned up. And I was like, I'm glad, because basically a TV show going into that properly. And that was supposed to just fit one of the many themes in mine. Like that's, it's interesting because you say, it's like, what are the limits here? And I think the purity of the first Star Wars, it's a fairy tale, the more I look at the first Star Wars, the more I'm fascinated by it, because it's so airy is not the word I mean. What I mean is like gossamer. It feels like something elfin, and it's the more I look, because it's so much the simpler one, and that because it's deliberately omitting, and of course and Star Wars is an art form about filling in the spaces, but every space is filled in fractal. So like every person, I'm paraphrasing a critic here, but basically, everybody in the bar has a story. And good Star Wars is when basically you tell their story, and that also leads to 40 other stories. And bad Star Wars is when you tell that story and that's it. That's like bad continuity Marvel superhero writing. The idea is that everything should be bigger, not bigger, but wider. Someone asked me about I saw a question about the research. When I was doing it, it's worth noting it was much easier. because like they just rebooted the canon. So the canon was Clone Wars, the movies, and that was the canon.
Hey!
I wanted to jump to this one. So Martine asked, diversity seems core to your work. I like how you don't make it a selling point or a story point or trumpet it about it, but it's nevertheless intrinsic. Care to comment on that? Where does that come from? Do you recognize that to start with?
I feel uncomfortable at selling it because, you know, I'm a random white dude. Like, you know, I just don't want to make that. I'm uncomfortable with that, but at the same time, like the world is diverse, people are diverse, you know, in lots of different ways, and I think it's important to just write the world as it is. You know what I mean? Like,
when we
you know, like when I was doing Wicked and Divine, which is like the book I did after a book called Young Avengers, it's explicitly the problem. One of the problems of the Marvel and DC universe is that they were made in the 1930s and 1960s, respectively, and all the primary characters are, you know, straight white people, and they're never going to retire. Basically, all of them have a boomer as a problem. You know, you know, and all those people are filling niches. You can't go to DC and make, okay, this character's the paragon that's all that's good and everyone respects them. That's Superman's job.
Yeah.
You know, so to actually make a universe from scratch, that's why we, you know, one reason we did Wicked and Divine was because, okay, we're going to make My Love Song to London, and you know, it's and it's a diverse book in dozens of ways, but you know, it's no more diverse than London or my friends or the world I live in. You know. So that's important, but at the same time, and I definitely don't want to say that people, when the diversity is further in the selling point, is a problem. Like, because I think lots of books, and I think actually because the only way you reach an audience is making sure people know the book does it. But at the same time, like when we did Young Avengers, like at the final issue we revealed the majority of the cast were bisexual. Not true. The majority of the cast were like not straight. And there was a solitary. There was a token straight member. That was, you know, it was inverted. Instead of the token gay character, there's a token straight character. And we did that in issue 15 for a bunch of reasons. But like, and of course the characters have been written like that all the way through, because it's a fractal story. It's meant to be reread repeatedly. Therefore, giving information later is also giving information earlier. But at the same time, by putting it in the last issue, Marvel won't be able to sell books off it. You know, it's not going to be a press release that said first majority queer super team. Because we don't want to do, you know, that would make us feel incredibly uncomfortable. So partially I just hate censoring. I mean, I'm not straight myself, you know, and I hate talking about anything like that. So there's partially that. So there's a lot of contrasting things in there.
It's a difficult subject in general, really. Yeah, it does. I mean, because we had something similar when we were redoing Warhammer for the 4th edition, because we were very, very interested in bringing what should have been the diversity of the setting front and center in the actual book itself. But the setting had been created in the 80s, and it was so very, very white in absolutely everything it did, and so very male dominated as well. And breaking that and deciding right from the beginning to break that right down the line was deeply controversial for many. The idea that there was, I mean, just that there was an attempt to do 50-50 split between men, women, and whatever else may lie in between in there. And that caused issues, just getting that into place. And then when it was actually received, there was a significant portion of the fan base that went, wow, there's too many women. Why is there so many women? Why is there so many people I can't tell what gender they are? What's going on here? Is this person a man or a woman? I don't understand. I don't understand.
Andy and I, we had conversations back and forth because I was writing the careers about and we chose to call the monk career the nun career, and I got like emails from people about those choices, the fact that it was River Women, not River Man, explaining to me how like River Man was just a default, so it was okay, like, and River Women meant something differently, and they had an all male table, and how do you think they felt like introducing their sons? And I was like, cry me a fucking river. Like, how do you... I can't even begin to reply to this email telling me that it was difficult for you to explain to your son that he could play a river woman as a river man. Like, what the actual? So yeah, it was an interesting time. I didn't reply like that. I replied more politely, as you can imagine. But,
you do want to like, I think it's really... I said one of those really depressing things I remember a few years ago. People peers of me, in fact, women I know slightly younger than me never had a female hero figure, and like we're talking about, and like until quite late in life, and that's obviously petrifying, because I absolutely had female hero figures, and people I wanted to be and admired, and and like I found that's one thing going back to Star Wars. Like, God, how many 6-year-old?
One Princess Leia.
But also Rey. Rey in Star Wars is going to save generation. So generation boy is going to realize that a girl can kill someone with a lightsaber, and the people who are whining about it are way too old to matter. Like these 6-year-olds will see it and just like realize it is normal to be able to like see somebody like that. And I always remember what you're describing is so painful, because so many marginalized groups had to see themselves in people other than the nature of empathy. Because and when people talk about diversity, there's normally two strands. One is seeing people like yourself in the work is important, and it is important. But the other side, which I don't say more important, but I think it's wider, because otherwise everyone just read fiction about people like themselves. One of the things fiction does allows you to empathize and embody and see yourself in people unlike yourself. That magical, that's what fiction allows us to do. People, it's not just about us, it's about other people. And it's the thing that people who have not been represented in books have always had to do constant. I mean, I know I'm saying the obvious here, but like, yes, it's not, and that's a good thing. I'm like, God, I mean, I found myself thinking about like how glad I got into Elastica or some band like that, or like how I really like Banana Armour as a kid. Like really basic things like that. I just like.
I agree completely. I'll add a little bit to that as well and say I think that's very much one of the strengths, not just of fiction, but particularly of role-playing games, where you're not just reading and potentially inhabiting someone's thoughts. You're actually creating and having to decide someone who might be very, very different to you, and stretching beyond just, I'm a white guy, so I'll play a white guy. I'm playing other things, and putting yourself in other people's shoes can make an enormous difference for just your opinion on life in general. And your view of how other people may or may not appreciate their lives. Yeah, it's one of the great strengths of roleplay, I think.
Kalashandra has a question asked, I've not yet read DIE, but RPGs meets comics sounds perfect to my ears. Care to sell me on why it's so awesome?
That's tricky. Not tricky, because otherwise I go into the straight pitch and you'll see my eyes not glaze over, but you'll see me go into autopilot. Like DIE is about.
How about make it difficult for yourself? Okay, try to do it in no more than 2 sentences.
Goth Jumanji, 1 sentence.
Oh, I'll do.
I've heard you describe it as the D&D cartoon for goths as well.
Yeah,
which I think works pretty well too.
I'll give the pitch document I sent to my opening like 3 paragraphs to Image when I said, hey, I want to do this book. Is this in 1991, 6 teenagers sat down to play a homebrewed RPG. They were disappeared. No one knows where they went. 2 years later, they were found wandering near Nottingham, I think I said. They were incapable of saying where they'd been or where the actual missing person had been. Everyone considered they were just lucky to have escaped. The year is now 2018. These teenagers are now adults, broken, sad adults, and about to discover that no one escapes. DIE is a logical collision between the 1980s D&D cartoon and Stephen King's It.
Why haven't I read that one? Cripes! I'm diving straight in.
It's good. So basically, what it is about is I found myself thinking the actual origin. I thought we had a conversation about the 1980s D&D cartooners and whatever happened to those kids, and a few jokes. And then that night, I'm sort of nagging over my head, and I suddenly realized what it's got me. And I just burst into tears because I found myself thinking the fear that part of me disappeared into a fantasy world at the age of 16 and never came out. How have games stunted me? I've written a lot about how this is my thing. I love writing about pop culture, and I always write a lot about the upsides, but I also write about how has this hurt me? What not like, and because in some ways the great joy about RPGs now is we've won. I mean, DIE is kind of a parody of Satanic Panic. Like it's basically, imagine if they were entirely right. Let's go, what I mean? RPGs are a machine designed to suck people's souls out. And it's not that simple. It's a lot more complicated. But we can play with the iconography and talk about the magic circle, and let's make the magic circle a literal magic circle. And the yada from there. So all of it became basically about let's take a group of people and who had their teenage fantasies and dreams, and then take them to adults and how has their lives gone wrong. Because the key part of the Die thing is they go to the fantasy world and the fantasy world externalizes their personal trauma and dreams and wishes at them. And both in comic and game, ask them the question, do you want to stay here or do you want to go home? It's a fantasy reality game. And of course, the way the game works and the comic works is everyone's got to agree. And dead people don't get votes. And that's it. And so you can say, like, as part of the game, it works great for drama because it obviously the push and pull between who wants to stay, who wants to go, and how it works out, and what are you willing to do? Because that's, you know, most people talk about drama. That it's always about what are you willing to do to get what you want. It's very clean, and in the game, it's similar. And like the whole of the game is about how, like, the first section is you generate a group of messed up people, personas we call them. So it's all about questions. I mean, this is my favorite question in the entire game. Well, it's 2 paired questions. You ask one player, okay, when you were a teenager, you had a dream. What was it? And then you ask another player, hey, when you were a teenager, you had a dream. What was it? And then later in the questions, you ask them, okay, that dream you had, you didn't get it. Just how do you feel about, how do you feel about that now? The other player you ask, that dream you had, you got it. It didn't make you happy. And that's like just the core of, like, no, all these people are going to be broken. You take them, you put them into this fantasy world, you transform into their paragons or iconic deconstructed classes. They go for an adventure because we give a lot of GM advice of how to mine people's backstories to learn into encounters. You know, like you've got to. I mean, I'll choose a crap example off the top of my head. You know, it's like your teenage bullies turn into the orcs, or like your distant father figure is the weird like a thieves guild mentor or whatever. You know, those kind of things, and it all builds. You know, and you explore this environment, and eventually you reach the moment where you catch up with the character who dragged you in, the master, and you discuss whether to go home or not. And it either, you know, it could be a therapy session, it could be a murder session, or anything in between, and then an epilogue. So in other words, it was deliberately designed by me to basically recapitulate the first arc of Die. In other words, like, this is how I did it. This is the magic trick of writing. And I've said a lot here.
Caravan asks, how would LARPers cope in the world of Die? Just before that, it was reminding me of a Tumblr post I read. So in the Narnia books, there's a throwaway line in the last battle that Susan basically doesn't get to go to heaven because, I don't know, she liked lipstick or something.
Yes.
No word of a lie. They all like die in a, sorry, spoilers, but, like, you know, those books are old. They all die in a train crash except Susan. But there's a Tumblr post that's like fan fiction, and it's basically what happened to Susan the last time she went back from Narnia, and I read it like with tears pouring down my face because it's so tragic. You know, she'd lived as a queen, she'd lived in a world where there were no gender stereotypes, and she could do what she wanted, and she was powerful, and then she went back into the body of a 15 or 16-year-old girl, and it's all about how she then
in the 1930s,
life and war, and it's like brutal and just beautiful, like, because I think that question of they had lived for 30 years and they just went back to be kids again was just it's amazing.
Have you read the Wayward Children books, or novellas rather?
No.
Like Wayward Children.
I'll write this down.
Sina McGuire. In fact, I think it won the Hugo for best series last year. There's like 9 of them now. So I love Sina. Like, I'm friendly with her now. But like, they're weird sister books. You can almost imagine a Die Wayward Children crossover. The concept of Wayward Children is it's basically a boarding school for people who went to Portal Fantasy Worlds and got kicked out, and now there's another school which is for people who want to forget it, but the people who are lazy, all these people went to Fantasy World, entirely messed up over it, and they all desperately want to go home and they can't. And that's and a lot of the stories aren't about the school; they're about like how they reached the Fantasy World in the first place. So it's basically that, you know, the idea of like escape and find. I was about to say someone's going to mention the problem of Susan, the game and novel, or the game and short story. I was going to mention that too.
That's
but like, it's such a good theme.
The Tumblr post is definitely different to the problem of Susan, but they're both good. Let's have a look. Caravan asks, how would LARPers cope in the world of Die?
How do LARPers cope anywhere?
I know.
I'll tell you what, it's like the good thing about one of the things about Die, its world is weird. Like, okay, Die is a D20 world with every side of the dice is based upon my deconstruction of a bit of the RPG hobby, or history of RPGs rather. And it's
can I just jump in here and say you're making it sound enormously cerebral. It's fucking brilliant. I read the first issue of the comic, knowing Kieron already, and going, this is really good. I'm interested. I think I know where he's going with this. I read issue 2, and it's like, holy shit! Wow, was not expecting that. And it just gets better and better and sticks the landing. I was desperately afraid it was not going to stick the landing. It sticks the landing. The DIE comics are absolutely worth your time, particularly as role players. Sorry, back to you, sir.
I know, I mean, it's always upon my work. My work is, if you get me talking about the wanky stuff, it gets very wanky. But at the same time, I'm also a popcorn head. You know, it's absolutely my favorite art is, in fact, across all forms, is both spectacularly dumb and spectacularly smart at the same time. And I'm always trying to basically do that. So, like in the case of, like, I think it was Robin D. Laws talking about Glorantha. Is that, you know, it was a world made by theologians, the same way that linguists, you know, Tolkien's Middle Earth is about linguists. And DIE is a world created by a critic. You know, so all the sides of the DIE are based around different parts of the hobby, and it's also a living critical argument. The kingdoms of DIE are at war with each other, so you've basically got an ongoing mechanics versus story game thing going on. You know, literally across, you know,
loving that.
You know, the whole, and there's a whole area of and in the comic, people haven't even visited all the regions yet in that way. If we ever do a sequel, we've got room for it. But there's a region where basically neighbouring the D&D region, which has just been wasted. You know, like the whole kind of like all these is where all the failed competitors of the D&D live, and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, so it's that, but at the same time, it's also about the, you know, that's the setting people go to in the comic, but it's also about their personal trauma. But in the game, there's also a part of the comic that beneath one of the regions, there's infinite worlds and eggs in a Lovecraftian hellhole kind of vibe. So all the games happen their own individual little egg world inside DIE. So every single world is its unique paracosm, you know. So LARPers, if you basically were playing people who were LARPers and then dragged into DIE, the world they would go to would be one of these little paracosms, and it'd be a paracosm about kind of a warped version of whatever their weird LARPing experience was. And if I was running, that's one way of running it, but I would probably run it as I've got several some of my sort of classic DIE scenarios are kind of set at cons. And you take the con map and run it as a nightmare scenario. So you use like the trading, you know, the trading hall's got a dragon in or whatever. So I would take a map of Empire and basically I'd put them in the real Empire that's somehow also the fictional Empire, and use the map of the actual site as the map they would be going around, and it would get incredibly meta very quickly. So basically, LARPers would cope as well as anyone else would, as in badly.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
There's actually a bit of LARPing in the game. There's a tiny Nordic LARP section for about 5 minutes in the first session. Just because the whole of the game design is my love song to the whole hobby. It's basically an argument between various bits of strands and yada yada.
So Martine asks, other than DIE, which of your works would you like made into an RPG?
So my big sigh. Actually, we actually were involved in conversations over a Wicked Divine RPG for a while. In fact, there's a really good, and I don't want to say too much because it was before pandemic, and I'm going to pick up that conversation at some point. But like, there was a really good. Okay, in the meantime, there's a really good Monster Hearts 2 hack called. Oh my god, what's it called? I can't remember. It's in the Gauntlet published it in one of their zines, but basically it allows you to basically do Wicked Divine, but in Monster Hearts 2. And that's fun. Because let's be honest, Monster Hearts 2 is being the archetypal slutty bisexual murdering game. That's basically Wicked.
Secondhand Samurai says the DIE comic made me buy special obsidian and glass dice for the RPG. I'm not sure if that is a recommendation or a warning.
It's because the game is totemic. You know, like in the actual, like the whole point, there's a bit of you pass out that every player owns one of the dice. Oh, that's part of the world building. Each of the player classes gets sole ownership of one of the dice, which feeds into a lot of other stuff. So you pass out the dice, and like it's very ritualized. So absolutely, like the fancier dice you get because you open the box, you know, kind of like you open the box and then like everyone takes the dice and no one else touches anyone else's dice. It's all about trying to like amp up the ritualism and, you know, I said the satanic panic of it all. Anyway.
Yeah, but also how players, you know, like get weird over their dice. Like some
Yes.
players do test rolls to make sure that they're working right. Some players won't roll them because they don't want to waste like the good rolls on the test rolls beforehand. Like everyone does weird shit with their dice.
I love it. Honestly, it's all that kind of dice rituals is fascinating. And it's like, and they happen with people who never play RPGs either. You see it happen, because I play tested with so many different sorts of people, and obviously other games as well. But like seeing how instantly people go, oh, you're rolling really badly, don't let them roll again. You know, like people are amazing.
Yeah. Have you read Shared Fantasies? One of the first books about role-playing games, because it's by a sociologist back in the early 80s, you know, when role-playing was still developing as a scene, and he's talking to people in the Midwest around, you know, who've been in role-playing groups for as long as there have been role-playing groups. And it's got 6 pages on dice superstitions and traditions, and you read through it going, this is ridiculous. People are in, oh, I do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I said you recommended that book to me like when I was started early on in DIE, so like I got it because you recommended it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, like that is a fascinating, because it came out in 1982 and it's all about obviously you know I'm sort of talking to everyone else, but specifically the most of the research was done in the late 70s, and it's just as basically D&D was going from a college game, and suddenly people are leaving their children at this game, and that all the older players are pissed off being dumped with 16-year-olds, like all that. So it's a really fascinating pre-1982 red box period. And also F me, I obviously we used to swear, but like I can't swear as strong as I want to, how toxic the groups they describe are. Like the actual the sexual politics, like the amount of like discussion of rape, like that was normalized. And I was like, I've never played in any group that was as bad as what they describe here. As in, I don't think, like, I'm genuinely horrified at what was described here. Up to the point I always wanted to write to the author and say, is this really like? But no, he goes in later on. He spends quite a lot of time writing about in terms of the bit that it says they can't understand why women don't want to play with them either. Like, it's like
yes, there's almost a complete absence of women in the player groups. It's someone asking what the name is. Gary Allen Fine is the author. Shared Fantasies, Role-Playing Games as Social Worlds. I think it was originally the University of Chicago. I believe it's still in print.
Yeah, I think it's still in print. Yeah.
I was going to say we've got time for one more question, but we probably don't unless it's really. Let's just do this one really quickly. If money wasn't a concern and you had to choose one or the other, would you write comics and read them, or create games and play them? I would never be forced to choose.
I never I reject all forced dichotomy.
Yeah, exactly.
In reality, I make stuff as I go along, and it's like my entire career has been basically following my weirdo obsessions at any one given moment. So any answer I give now would probably change by not next week, but like you don't know what I'm going to do, because I've somehow managed to eke out a career by following my obsessions. There's like as a bastardized Ballard quote, me and Jim Rossignol, the game designer and ex-critic, used to say, this isn't what Ballard wrote. Ballard's a better writer than we are. But we boil it down to stay true to your obsessions, and your obsessions will be true to you. Which of course isn't true, but it's like at least has kind of got us so far. Like, is that kind of like really caring about something as a power? Because it allows you to, because you were describing earlier about child, they already do it. So if you're already doing it anyway, it gives you enormous advantage because you want to do it anyway.
Kieron, this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm going to ask this as if we haven't already asked the question. Would you come back? We barely touched on DIE the game itself, and also your work with Warhammer and Games Workshop. Would you come back another time and talk to us some more? Perhaps when DIE is actually released in shops.
If you'd have me, it'd be lovely to be back.
Oh, it certainly would.
Well, what do you say, fans?
We would love to have you, Kieron. It feels like an hour has just gone whoosh.
It really has zipped by.
Yeah. That's the speed I talk. It's like when I listen to one podcast to myself, like I listen to podcast 1.25. So when I hear myself on a podcast, I'm inaudible. You can't understand a word I'm saying.
Brilliant.
This has been fantastic fun.
Right,
I'm interrupting Lindsay again.
More pretentious wank. Please.
I can give you that much.
The measure of our stream.
Thank you, Kieron. Thank you, James. Thank you, Andy. So, interesting. Yeah, also a guest star on Lawhammer. More about Lawhammer later. We'll talk about that in another stream. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to all our fans. Thanks, as always, to our patrons who make this possible. Next week, we'll be talking to the author, J. Diane Dotson, about her upcoming novel. So please...
No, we're not. We're talking about switching genres.
Oh, are we? Thank you, Andy.
No, me.
That's what I get when I don't come to ask you what we're talking about next week. We're talking about switching genres, yeah, with J. Diane Dotson. Until then, thank you. Good night. Remember to like, share, subscribe, follow, whatever it is that people do.
All those
on
things.
Socials, on all those things. And all that remains for me to say is good night and caw-caw, caw-caw.
Bye.